Welcome to Sullivan Street, one of the last episodes of 2025, and we're going to get into Saturday night, Sunday mornings, an album, the fifth studio album of Counting Crows, and in some ways unheralded, in some ways maybe a genius level record. But we'll get into all the track. We're going to do our rankings as usual and get a deep dive into the history of the album, etc. But first, let's talk to all the guests we have. Chris, I have to start with you. How are you?
Good. I'm doing good, and I'm happy to be here talking about this record. This is, I feel like, one of the first Crows records I was really like there for at the release, very fully into it, and I'll talk more about that. But like, I have a lot of fond memories of when this record came out, and so I'm very excited for us to go through all of it.
Right, being younger than at least me, maybe some of the other guests. I remember that. No, I remember you saying that this was kind of like a major time. I think you've mentioned that previously. And as usual, during our album deep dives, we have the historian Jeff Harkness. Jeff, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Excited to be here. It'll be fun to talk about this album. There are lots of songs, and I think in some ways it's the Counting Crows album that is most underrated by big Counting Crows fans. A lot of people love the first three or the first four albums, but this one is one that I think is just less familiar to Counting Crows fans. But I would say it's as worth exploring as any of their other albums. It's a great album, so it's going to be fun to kind of dig into one that maybe everyone's not quite as familiar with.
I totally agree. Back to the podcast too. We have podcaster extraordinaire, video game expert, communication. You're out there. Ryan DNC, Ryan McCaffrey. Ryan, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me back, guys. Happy holidays. This is I appreciate that intro to the album by Jeff, because I feel I'm very much I'm a major stan for this album. This album clicked with me right from the jump. In fact, I had heard 1492 a few years prior, actually many years prior to this album coming out, at a show, which I can talk about later. But I love this record, and I'm thrilled to be invited back to get to talk about it with you guys.
Thank you, Ryan. I felt the exact same way for me. Also on the guest, so we're going to be the four main people talking about the songs rankings, but joining us as a special, side character, Paul. I'm being a little of a smart aleck here, but Maltese Paul, who I met in Spain. Paul, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to listen to everyone's opinions on the album. I love Counting Crows, just like all of you, and it's always interesting to listen to.
Yeah, no, I met Paul. I talked about the last episode how I went to the Barcelona and Madrid shows. I met Paul in line. He was second, I think, in line of the super VIP. Chris's friend was first in line, and Paul was second in the super VIP section. And Paul had his swag bag, and I know at one point you had the signed Butter Miracle. Later, you showed me all of the signed and other material you have in your in your flat. Jeff, I mentioned you when he goes, you know what? I think I have that book. So he also has your book. So yeah, Jeff likes that. But it ends up that I told the other guests that when I invited, we just happened to be on this album. So I said, hey, join this one. And then 2 days ago, Paul said, you realize that's the album I know the least about, but we still wanted to have him on the podcast. He helped us with a couple tiebreakers, and looking forward. But Paul, just, well, I guess we'll start with you. With your history, do you remember buying this album? I know you said you didn't listen to it for a long time. You had to reacquaint yourself. Do you have any memories at all buying it or no?
Well, I remember buying it upon release. And I played it. It kind of grew onto me. But I was listening to many other bands at the time. So this is why I can say I know it less than the others.
Right. Now that makes sense. Ryan, you said you had a click with you right away. Any memories of, first buying it, etc.?
Yeah, well, this one, as I'm sure Jeff is gearing up to point out, because he's on top of all this, but just as a fan, this was the first of what would become a normal pattern. This is when we went from like clockwork every 3 years for a Counting Crow studio album to 6.
Mhm.
And this one also hit for me at a really particular. I mean, I think we probably all feel this way about albums that mean a lot to us in life, but for me, this every Counting Crows album kind of marks a different phase or era of my life, and this one actually hit right as I had just gotten divorced. I got married young, didn't work. That's not a story for this podcast, but I definitely have memories of like just belting out like screaming the lyrics to "You Can't Count on Me" as like a real kind of in the moment thing for me. But that was sort of my life situation. But it's this album really did just click with me right away. And in fact, it first clicked with me. I am a graduate of Arizona State University, but I had friends that went to the University of Arizona down in Tucson. And I believe, I should have double checked this before the recording, but it's been a busy day. I think it was in the spring of 2002, I think, Counting Crows played a little theater down at the University of Arizona. So I went down for the show and to visit my friends that were going to U of A, and they played 1492. So it's like, there's this song that I had never heard before, and it was the like hardest rocking song probably since Angels of the Silences at that point, like in 2002. So I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. That was also the one time I've ever met the band. I waited for them outside the venue, and they all came out and they signed my August and Everything After CD. And I think I said to probably Adam, just, I hope 1492 makes it on the next album, which of course it didn't. It took a little longer, but yeah, I definitely was ready for this one from day one when it dropped in 2008.
Yeah, I tried to tell Paul because I partly because I talked to Paul both before and after the show in Barcelona, and he after the show he got pictures with was it Emmy and Jim. And then he saw Adam and I said, Paul, yeah, back in the day, you used to be able to meet them. Nowadays, they do not come out after the show at all. So even the fact that you met a couple, that you got to take a photo of a couple of them, you got like retro in a way, right? Right, Chris?
Yeah, I was lucky.
Yeah. Jeff, let's go to you.
Yeah. So this album, I mean, I think I've said before that the peak of my Counting Crows fandom was probably 2003 with the release of Hard Candy. I'd been a fan since the beginning, but at that point, they were my favorite band. By the time that this album came out, 6 years later, I was deep in the midst of a 6-year study of the underground rap music scene in Chicago. And I was completely immersed in that. Every single night, I was going out to clubs and going to hip hop shows. And I was writing, this is all documented in my first book, Chicago Hustle and Flow. And I was making a documentary film about the underground rap music scene in Chicago and interviewing musicians, and deeply immersed in music, but deeply immersed in local Chicago rap music at that time. Counting Crows was still really one of my favorite bands. So when this album came out, I remember getting it right away from online sources, listening to it right away. And it was not in the wheelhouse of where I was at musically. I've said before, I think that, there's kind of two parts to being, when a new album comes out, it's where is the band in their trajectory? And then where are you in your own life and your own fandom? And my music listening at that time was in a really different place. The one thing I remember, though, immediately was going, I Dream of Michelangelo. That's like an instant classic song, instant Counting Crows classic. Even at the time, I recognized that, that's the Counting Crows that I know and love. So I always remembered that song, and it stayed in my sort of wheelhouse for a while. But this was an album that I eventually came back to later and sort of deep dove into. And I would say today that I really love this album. I think it's in some ways, their most interesting and eclectic and certainly hardest rocking album in some places. And so it's been fun sort of discovering it as a longtime fan.
All right. And before me, we'll go to Chris, your introduction to the album.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sort of the opposite to Jeff in that this was around the time of the release of this record. This was one of like the peaks of my fandom. I saw the band between August of 2007 and October 2008 14 times. That sounds very impressive, and but the furthest I went from New York City was Washington D.C. They were just playing New York a lot when this record came out, and so part of my sort of relationship to this record is I saw them play it in small clubs. I saw them at the Bowery Ballroom play a 2-set show in which the second set was basically this entire record with the stories behind it.
Wow.
And so it's interesting. I remember obviously when this record came out, but I also remember hearing the songs from it, some of them way before at times. Because as we'll talk about, some of them have histories, way beyond before this record. But they were playing these songs a lot, and they were sprinkling things out. Come Around had come out earlier. 1492 and Michelangelo, they dropped out kind of early, relative before the release, and so this is kind of one of the early albums I can think of where the band was kind of sprinkling things out in the way that bands do now, where you get to the record and you've already heard half of it because there's a single and a single and a single. And that's kind of how this one was. And so it's interesting. I love a lot of these songs, and I feel like a very deep relationship to the record, but I'm also not exactly sure how many times I've sat down and listened all the way through to this record because I was hearing them play the songs live, and that's kind of what I was interacting with, especially in 2007 and 2008. And some of those shows are again still some of my favorite shows. They played, everyone knows there's that Town Hall show that was the August and Everything After DVD. The second set of that was 5 songs from this record before they played some covers to close it out. So like they were out front and doing these songs. And so I actually believe originally it was supposed to come out in late 2007, and for some reason they ended up pushing it back to March of 2008. So there was a big anticipation for it. So it's interesting. I had a very nice time listening to these songs and thinking about where I was in 2007, 2008. So good times.
All right, great. And then that leaves me. Ryan, I'm with you. It really hit me where I was at that moment. Now, I was living in Japan at the time at that week, and I had my friend Todd, who I brought up a few times on the podcast because we've gotten into the Crows together. He's drifted a little bit since then, but he brought me the album because he visited literally, I think, 3 days after it got released. It was interesting timing. And obviously CDs come out in Japan, but I think for some reason it was going to get a slightly delayed schedule there, right? It wasn't coming out that week. So I was able to get it there. And obviously I'd already heard the singles. We'll talk about that they released the internet singles. So I'd been listening to them already. And we'll get into the lyrics later, but I was I don't know what's the party like. Things were like in some ways I was happy, but I also had no responsibility, and maybe so how do I say, more like either substance. When you have too much, what do they call them? It was like Nile. When you have too much fun, you start to go down to a rabbit hole, right? And I think that's part of what Adam's talking about.
I mean, that's what this record's about. Like that is what this like the first half of the record, especially, that is what that record is about. If you were having too much fun, Eric, you were having your Saturday night.
Yeah, and like kind of angry and hungover, and the Sunday mornings we'll talk about. I mean, and then I was like, how can each album keep getting better? He knows me. His ghost is following me. Because at that age of my life, none of my other friends were, or I shouldn't say that. Not many of my other friends were kind of going through what I did, right? Where like in August, everybody's like, yes, I can relate to Anna. Where this one spoke to me because I know other people were like, what are you talking about? I'm taking my kids to the park. What are you talking about? 1492. So, and then even come around and because and then Todd and I actually got into I shouldn't say it was a brief falling out near the end, and it lasted like a month or two where then it got back, but part of that kind of tied to some of this too, related to also me going down the kind of maybe negative losing yourself in the rabbit hole, so to speak. Okay, so let's get into a bit of the history of the album. As I just said, released March 2008, March 25th. Like our guests have already hinted, clearly, maybe Adam wouldn't like that I say this, but to me, clearly, it's the start of chapter 2 of the Crows, and we already kind of hinted this. And the first album I believe, right, that has all the current lineup. Right, so there's the first album. I know that Matt and Ben have some credits on here, but it's really that second chapter. Like you said, it was also the 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, and now we got the 6 years. So yeah, the first with the lineup. The reviews were all over the place. I just looked again. I always liked All Music. I don't know why. I know a lot of people don't like them. They gave them 4.5 stars, but other people 2 stars, and then a bunch 3, 3.5, B-. So reviews were all over the place. So they did it. So the idea, and I'm sure Jeff will get into this, was at first just to record Saturday nights as a solo album. Then he got these ideas and then recorded Saturday nights and then Sunday morning. One thing that surprised me, of course, Gil was the producer of Recovering the Satellites. And he almost doesn't get enough credit for this, right? People do not mention him. They always mention the great job in Recovering. And they love Recovering. And I'm like, yeah, some of those same manager ingredients that Gil did to Recovering are here, obviously. One thing I did not know until today is that Adam chose Brian Deck just by doing a bunch of internet research on different producers. And
I was listening to records. He was like, I like those.
So as we hinted, I think it's about, his break into, I mean, he's hinted about mental issues in the past in other songs, but this is where it really came to light, both in real life, because he was talking about his mental struggles for the first time when this got released. I remember reading that, like literally like a week or two before was the first time I saw it in an interview. And clearly this is about mental health challenges. Some of the songs, one quote was, this is not about mental health, but wanting to mean something and then failing to do it, wanting to be somebody and then being less than you thought. I certainly relate to that. Interesting. Debuted at number 3, which was higher than Desert Life and higher than Hard Candy. Although unlike those two, as far as I can tell, never got the gold certification, even though it said to get ranked, to get the third, number 3 on the charts, that it sold 100,000 copies. Well, that's already 20% to gold. So, maybe it was just a steep sell-off.
But this is the kind of time period where you're starting to get the thing where it's the fans of the band who are buying the record, that, they're picking up new people, but I don't know exactly how many this sold, but it's the people who were excited to buy this record, had bought this. They probably pre-ordered it on iTunes or whatever. It's that kind of period. But I also think interesting you're talking about in the mental health, because I agree that this is Adam was starting to talk about mental health a lot. And I think the other interesting thing around this time is that, again, I mean, obviously it went through a lot of phases, and I'm obviously not in the man's head, but this was when they came back in late 2007, he was looking sort of visually healthier than he had in a long time. Like, he was looking sort of like sharp and engaged, and the band sounded great. And like, it was just like, it was it seemed like he had come through something kind of fully around this time. And maybe that's part of why he felt comfortable talking about it. I don't know. But it is kind of an interesting time period in that regard.
That's interesting. And I hinted on this once, and I was also really wasted, so I'm not sure. But I think I hinted at only the one time I saw them that I feel that Adam wasn't really 100% in it for whatever reason. And that was, as you said, a couple years prior, around 2005, I think it was. So,
yeah. He literally, when he talks about like kind of putting on my shoes and go, he literally put shoes back on around this time. It was from like 2003 to 2006, he played barefoot. And then he came back in 2007 and was like, yeah, boots. I've got some cool boots and a lot of cool band t-shirts, and we're going to fucking do this. And it was an interesting shift around that time. And again, I think part of it is the band sounded amazing, maybe partially integrating, Millard and maybe even Jim Foley at that point. But that's kind of where the band was in a good place, I think, around when this record came out.